South Africa recently found itself in the spotlight after US President Donald Trump decided to step in where he wasn't invited. His big move? Cutting off US aid to the country over its newly approved land reform policies. But what really got people talking was what happened next. Just days after Trump's announcement, Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traore, made a bold move of his own, declaring that from now on, all land in the country belongs to the government. This decision has sparked a heated debate. Some call it a smart strategy, while others see it as a dangerous power grab. But why did Traoré push for such a drastic change? And what does it mean for farmers, businesses, and foreign investors in Burkina Faso? Let's break it down. On February the 5th, Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers approved a new bill that completely changed how land is owned in the country. During a key meeting, Economic Minister Abubakar Nakano explained that this reform was designed to optimise land management and ensure the government plays a stronger role in overseeing land use. In simple terms, the government now owns all the land. For years, land in Burkina Faso was controlled through customary laws. Local communities managed and passed down land through generations based on traditions. Families felt a strong connection to their land, and ownership was deeply rooted in history. But this system wasn't perfect. With no clear legal documents, land disputes were common. Powerful elites often took advantage of the system, leaving ordinary citizens with little protection. Now, with this new reform, all of that has changed. The government has taken control, and local authorities will now oversee land use through official regulations. Some critics argue that Traoré is just consolidating power, but his administration insists that this is a calculated strategy to fix long-standing land issues. By shifting ownership to the state, the government can introduce a structured system where land is leased out for long-term use, anywhere from 18 to 99 years. This move, they claim, will bring stability, attract investments, and ensure that land is used more efficiently. But is there more to the story? If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. If there's one thing President Ibrahim Traoré has made clear, it's that he is fiercely committed to protecting Burkina Faso's sovereignty. And his latest move? A land reform law that puts an end to foreign ownership of land in the country. This is a major shake-up. Across Africa, it's common to see foreign companies and investors buying up massive amounts of land. Why? Because the continent is rich in natural resources and has vast stretches of fertile land. And, for years, foreign entities have taken full advantage of weak land protections, securing enormous plots for farming, mining, and carbon offset programs. This isn't a new problem. Foreign corporations, sovereign wealth funds, and even banks have been snapping up African land for years, often at the expense of local farmers. The trend became especially noticeable after the 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis, when skyrocketing food prices triggered a race to control prime farmland. At the time, European citizens were shocked to learn that their banks and corporations were involved in deals that pushed African farmers off their land. And while the crisis eventually faded from headlines, the rush for land never really stopped. In fact, it's only gotten worse. Today, land prices worldwide have more than doubled. And this new wave of land grabbing is fueled not just by agriculture, but by industries looking to profit from carbon credits, mining, and mega-development projects. The result? Small farmers, indigenous communities, and herders are being displaced at an alarming rate. Take, for example, Blue Carbon, a firm based in the Gulf. It recently secured a staggering 25 million hectares of land across 5 African countries. That's 10% of Liberia's total land area, and 20% of Zimbabwe's land. Gone. Just like that. For Burkina Faso, this isn't just about land, it's about survival. By shifting ownership to the government, Traoré is putting a stop to large-scale foreign land acquisitions that strip local communities of their resources. But that's not all. For decades, land in Burkina Faso has been mismanaged, with vast stretches sitting idle. Now, with the government in charge, land can be allocated efficiently for large-scale farming projects that will help improve food security. Beyond agriculture, Burkina Faso has also faced ongoing conflicts between farmers, herders, and migrating populations over land rights. By centralizing control, the government can regulate land use in a way that reduces tensions and prevents disputes. And then there's the bigger picture, Traoré's push for industrialization. With the state in charge of land, the government can fast-track infrastructure projects like roads, factories and housing developments without running into resistance from private landowners or getting tangled in bureaucracy. When it comes to land reform, no two countries take the same approach. Take South Africa, for example. Their policy is all about fixing past injustices. For decades, land ownership in South Africa was anything but fair. During colonial rule and apartheid, laws were created to keep land in the hands of the white minority while pushing the black majority into poor, overcrowded areas. One of the most infamous of these laws was the 1913 Natives Land Act, which made it nearly impossible for black South Africans to own land. This pattern of land dispossession continued for decades, leading to forced removals, the destruction of communities, and deep economic inequality. Even though apartheid officially ended in the early 1990s, the effects of these policies still shape South Africa today. That's why the South African government introduced a land reform program to redistribute land more fairly. However, this process has been controversial. Some critics, including former US President Donald Trump, have argued that it unfairly targets white landowners. But South African leaders insist that their approach is rooted in legal, constitutional principles and aims to create a fairer society, not to punish any particular group. Now, how does this compare to Burkina Faso's approach? While South Africa is focused on historical justice, Burkina Faso is taking a strategic economic approach. Instead of redistributing land from one group to another, President Ibrahim Traore has placed all land under state control. This means that rather than individual ownership, the government will oversee land use, ensuring it is properly managed for farming, industry, and development. Unlike South Africa, which is navigating a deeply complex history of land ownership, Burkina Faso is looking forward, creating a system that prioritizes national control and economic growth while still recognizing local land rights through rural possession certificates. Whenever land reform is discussed in Africa, Zimbabwe's history often comes up as a warning. Back in the early 2000s, Zimbabwe's economy took a severe downturn, and many people blamed it on land seizures carried out by Robert Mugabe's government. Critics argued that by redistributing land from white farmers to black Zimbabweans, the country triggered a collapse in agricultural production, leading to food shortages and economic decline. But is the story really that simple? Zimbabwe's land issues go all the way back to British colonial rule. Under the 1930 Land Apportionment Act, black Africans were stripped of their right to own land freely. This law forced millions of indigenous Zimbabweans onto poor, overcrowded reserves, while a tiny white settler population controlled more than half of the country's most fertile farmland. By the time Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, the land issue remained unresolved. Mugabe's government initially tried a willing buyer, willing seller approach, in which white farmers were encouraged to sell land voluntarily. But progress was slow, and frustration grew. Eventually, in the early 2000s, the government seized white-owned farms and redistributed them to black Zimbabweans, many of whom lacked the resources or training to farm on a large scale. The sudden shift caused chaos, and the economy suffered. Mugabe, once seen as a revolutionary hero, was now painted as a villain by Western media. His name became synonymous with economic collapse, even though the deeper causes of Zimbabwe's financial struggles, sanctions, mismanagement, and structural weaknesses, were often ignored. But does Zimbabwe's experience mean land reform can't work elsewhere? Back in 1979, during the Lancaster House peace talks, where Zimbabwe's future was being decided, Britain made a promise. As part of the agreement that led to the country's independence, the British government pledged to help fund a land redistribution programme. At the time, land ownership in Zimbabwe was completely lopsided. A tiny group of white settlers, descended from British colonial rulers, controlled most of the country's best farmland. Meanwhile, the vast majority of black Zimbabweans had been pushed onto poor, overcrowded lands. Fixing this injustice was supposed to be a key part of independence. Britain initially followed through, sort of. It provided £44 million in aid for land reform in the early years after independence. But that amount was nowhere near enough to address the deep inequalities in land ownership. And when Zimbabwe kept pressing Britain to honour its full commitment, something unexpected happened. In 1997, Claire Short, Britain's International Development Secretary at the time, delivered a stunning blow. She told Zimbabwe's leaders that because her government had no ties to the country's colonial past, Britain no longer had any special responsibility to help with land reform. Just like that, the UK walked away from its promise. But the problem wasn't just that Britain refused to help. Zimbabwe's land reform programme had been rigged from the start. Under the terms of the Lancaster House Agreement, land would not be returned to its original owners. Instead, Zimbabwe's new government was forced into a willing buyer, willing seller system. That meant the Zimbabwean government had to buy back the land, in British pounds or US dollars. The price was set by the white landowners who had taken the land in the first place. 95% of Zimbabwe's economy was controlled by Europeans and Americans, making it nearly impossible for black Zimbabweans to reclaim land on their own. This system was slow, expensive, and frustrating. Year after year, Zimbabwe struggled to make progress. Meanwhile, the people who had fought for independence, the war veterans who had risked their lives to free their country, were still landless. Eventually, they had had enough. By the late 1990s, Zimbabweans were fed up with waiting. Frustrated war veterans and landless citizens began taking matters into their own hands, occupying white-owned farms across the country. Faced with growing pressure, the government finally gave in to the will of the people. In June 2000, Zimbabwe officially seized white-owned farms and redistributed the land. But this move set off a chain reaction that would reshape the country's future. Britain's response was swift. It condemned Zimbabwe's actions. And then came the real punishment. The United States and the European Union stepped in, imposing some of the harshest sanctions Zimbabwe had ever seen. In 2002, the European Union froze assets and banned key Zimbabwean officials from travelling. In 2003, US President George W. Bush issued an executive order that officially declared Zimbabwe a threat to American interests. That declaration pushed Zimbabwe into economic isolation. Under these sanctions, Zimbabwe was cut off from international banks like the IMF and World Bank. Foreign companies were banned from doing business with the Zimbabwean government. The country was forced to repay all its international debt, immediately and in full. Western leaders called these targeted measures meant to pressure Zimbabwe's government, but in reality, the sanctions crippled the entire economy, hurting ordinary people more than politicians. While many blame Zimbabwe's economic collapse on the land seizures, they often overlook the devastating impact of these severe economic restrictions. Imagine waking up one day and finding out that your entire country has been cut off from the rest of the world. No money can come in, no businesses can trade internationally, and even basic necessities like medicine and fertilizers become nearly impossible to get. That's exactly what happened to Zimbabwe. The Industrial Development Corporation of Zimbabwe, IDCZ, the state-run organization responsible for driving industrial growth, was completely blacklisted. Every cent it had in foreign accounts, frozen, but that was just the beginning. The United States went even further, ensuring that no foreign banks could conduct business with Zimbabwe. As a result, the country was completely isolated from global markets, unable to access credit, trade essential goods, or even import the technology it needed to keep industries running. The impact was devastating. The domino effect of economic sanctions. With no access to funding or global trade, entire industries in Zimbabwe started crumbling. Agriculture suffered. Farmers couldn't get fertilizers or modern equipment. Factories shut down. They couldn't import spare parts to keep machines running. Hospitals ran short on medicine because Zimbabwe was locked out of the international supply chain. And then came the drought, a natural disaster that only made things worse. With agricultural productivity already struggling due to sanctions, food shortages became even more severe. People were starving, and yet the Western media refused to acknowledge the real cause. Instead, the popular narrative became, that's the story the world was told. But is it the truth? By the late 2000s, Zimbabwe's currency was in freefall. The value of the Zimbabwean dollar crashed so hard that the government started printing trillion-dollar notes, money so worthless that people needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy bread. The official explanation? Mugabe's mismanagement. But let's look at the facts. When a country is cut off from international banking, trade and credit, what options does it have left? The government had no choice but to print more money in a desperate attempt to keep the economy afloat. And when more money is printed without actual wealth to back it up, inflation skyrockets. The economic collapse wasn't just about land reform, it was a direct result of the crushing sanctions imposed by Western powers. Today, Zimbabwe is still paying the price. The government is negotiating with the US, hoping to get the sanctions lifted. But Washington has made one thing very clear. Before sanctions are removed, Zimbabwe must compensate white farmers for the land that was taken from them. But how is Zimbabwe supposed to pay when the economy is already struggling under the weight of these sanctions? This isn't just about Zimbabwe. It's about a larger pattern, a world where African nations are constantly lectured and punished whenever they make decisions that don't align with Western interests. Yet, something is changing. President Traore has made a bold move, showing that African leaders can stand their ground and put their country's interests first. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content.